American history, the LGBT plus community has resisted against discrimination and inequality. A recent stride toward justice was in 2015 when the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage in all 50 states. However, the right to marry has been one of a vast number of achievements for the LGBT plus community to overcome oppressive laws. Especially during the 1950s through the 1970s, the LGBT plus community resisted another injustice: police discrimination and brutality, reinforced by strict laws to criminalize homosexuality. In fact, majority of the states did not begin to decriminalize homosexuality until the 1970s through the 1980s, and it finally becoming decriminalized across the country in 2003. Moreover, through continuously enduring police violence and having to confide their true identities for their own safety, resulted in the LGBT plus liberation movements. Furthermore, the Black Cat protest is one event during the LGBT plus liberation movement that preceded other famous uprisings, but seldomly is discussed in the LGBT plus civil rights conversation. Approximately 2 years before the famous LGBT plus riots at the Stonewall Inn in New York, Los Angeles provided a backdrop for the LGBT plus civil rights campaign. In particular, the Black Cat Tavern, located in Silver Lake, California, was originally constructed as a grocery in 1939, but by the 1960s contained a gay bar and laundromat. Further, the Black Cat Tavern became a significant part of LGBT plus history on New Year's Day in 1967, when the New Year's celebration came to life at midnight, with many LGBT plus couples sharing a New Year's kiss. Undercover police began assaulting and arresting patrons. During this police raid, there were 8 undercover officers from the LAPD, and after beating and dragging many of the bar's patrons into the street, 14 people were arrested and charged with assault and public lewdness. Their crime? Publicly displaying homosexuality. Throughout American history, the LGBT plus community has been an oppressed group that has only recently began to gain the justices the majority has always been granted. The author of the homosexual rights movements in the United States, a traditional overlooked area of American history, discusses 8 stages in the growth of the LGBT plus movement. The stage that this event falls under is Stage 6. In Stage 6, civil rights activism encouraged the formation of the LGBT plus movement. During the time of this event in 1967, the LGBT plus community lived under intimidation. During this time, homosexuality was considered a mental illness in the United States. Sexual relations between 2 men or 2 women was illegal in California, and a conviction of lewd conduct required convicts to register as sex offender. In addition to the criminalization of same-sex relations, the LGBT plus community faced tremendous harassment and oppression. 6 of the 14 men arrested during the raid for exchanging New Year's kisses were convicted of lewd conduct and were liable under California Penal Code Section 647 to register as sex offenders for the rest of their lives. Furthermore, the relationship between law enforcement and the LGBT plus community has been a turbulent one. In response to the police raid at Black Cat Tavern in 1967, over 200 people gathered on the corner of Sunset and Sanborn in the heart of LA's Silver Lake District on February 11, 1967. Moreover, the activists held signs peacefully protesting police unlawfulness and brutality that had been humiliating and targeting the gay community for years. As seen in the images of the signs that the protesters held, there is no indication that this protest was about the treatment of the LGBT plus community by the police, but instead about the unlawfulness of the police altogether, and many organizers made it a priority to keep the signs free of any LGBT plus indications. Preceding the Stonewall riot by 2 years, the Black Hat protest became the largest LGBT plus civil rights movement event to occur in American history at this date. In the protests that followed, LGBT plus activists succeeded in combating police brutality and reforming the law enforcement's practices. The LGBT plus rights movement was successful in ending routine harassment of lesbians and gays in public spaces, and this would have important consequences for the future of the LGBT plus community. Furthermore, this recognizes the Black Hat Tavern as a historical site and was made that in 2008. Moreover, the analytical explanation for this event can be further understood using Martin Luther King's framework of collective nonviolence. In Martin Luther King's framework, he addresses the importance of using nonviolence to gain justice. Firstly, in the letter from Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King discusses the 4 components of a nonviolent campaign. 1. Determining whether injustices exist. 2. Negotiation. 3. Self-purification. And 4. Direct action. Martin Luther King describes the concept of direct action in great detail. Direct action can include nonviolent protest, demonstrations, and strikes. Direct action forces a community to confront the injustices and opens the door to negotiation. As earlier discussed with the Black Hat protest, the activists used direct action in the response to the police raid that ended up in the arrest of 14 patrons. Through making and displaying signs to protest police unlawfulness instead of reacting violently, the protesters successfully practiced collective nonviolence. Secondly, another aspect of Martin Luther King's framework that can be related to the Black Cat protest is that laws are man-made and not created by the divine. In the text, Martin Luther King discusses a just law follows the moral code or the law of God. An unjust law does not follow the moral law. Further, Martin Luther King argues that it is an individual's responsibility to use their conscience and reasoning to disobey unjust laws to seek justice. In connection with the Black Hat protest, the LGBT plus community experienced the oppression encouraged by unjust laws that made it illegal to be homosexual. Through years of inequality, the LGBT plus community joined together through organizations to protest the unlawfulness as evident in the Black Hat protest. The reaction of the LGBT plus community to the police raid inspired more activism to transpire within the LGBT plus community. Thirdly, in the text, Martin Luther King states, if his repressed emotions are not released in nonviolent ways, they will seek expression through violence. To put it simply, I think Martin Luther King is saying that when oppressed people are denied the right to protest, demonstrate, or strike peacefully, the only other option for them is violence. While violence was not an issue during the Black Hat protest, the repressed emotions of the LGBT plus community being mistreated by the police for years are what inspired the protest to take place. To continue, I think the LGBT plus rallies are also an important reminder of how far the community has come through oppressive decades to still fight against discrimination in the public eye. Overall, the Black Hat protest is a significant event in LGBT plus history that often gets shadowed by larger protests, like Stonewall. Preceding such events, the Black Hat protest is certainly the backdrop for LGBT plus liberation movement. Moreover, using collective nonviolent frameworks, such as Martin Luther King, aid in understanding the activism and success of this historical event. The LGBT plus community has a turbulent history in America. Through successfully overcoming police brutality, inequality in laws, discrimination in the public eye, and finally being granted the right to marry in 2015. Despite these achievements, inequality still exists within this community, and discussing LGBT plus history and applying it to the future is the key to making more strides towards equality.